Çağatay Çivici, PrimeTech'in kurucusu. Aynı zamanda bugün Angular 2 hakkında konuşacak. Sahneyi kendisine devrediyorum.
Teşekkürler. Merhaba, sesim geliyor herhalde. Türkçe mi yapalım, İngilizce mi? English? Türkçe. Okay. Okay, welcome everyone. My name is Çağatay. So anyone, okay. So I'll talk about Angular 2 today. It will take around 40 minutes. My name is Çağatay Çivici. Have you heard of prime faces? Okay, so. And anyone heard of prime ng? Okay, that's good. I'm interested in Spanish these days. I'm taking Spanish courses. Developer means in Spanish desarrollador. So I'm a desarrollador. Programcı deyince biraz karizma gidiyor ama desarrollador is a very nice word. I'm an expert group member of Java Surfaces. So we're working on JSF 2.3. I'm a Java developer. Now I'm working on JavaScript mostly though. So I'm also Apache MyFaces committee member, project management committee member. Prime Faces, the author of Prime Faces, which is the best library for Java Surfaces, and for me, one of the best libraries for Java server-side web framework. Prime UI, probably not many people heard of it. Prime UI, yeah. It's a jQuery-based library, so you can just use jQuery with the backend agnostic, so you can use any library with it. Prime Elements is just like the talk before me. It's about web components, but we are not really actively developing it because right now we are fully focused on Faces and ng. Prime ng is the new library for Angular 2, which is one of the most popular ones right now. There are also other ones, but Prime ng I will also briefly discuss, but today's talk is mostly about Angular 2. I'm also a regular speaker on conferences like Java 1, DevOps, and so on. Angular 2, so it's cross-platform. So you see a tablet here, a Mac, well, it looks like a Mac, a laptop, and a mobile phone. So you can develop your application and run on anywhere. Does it sound familiar? Write once, run anywhere. It's like Java and the .NET platform, but it's really, you need to use JavaScript to do those kind of things. So using Electron, for example, you can write your, execute your application in a desktop like Linux, Mac, Windows. So it will be a JavaScript like Atom or Slack. So they are applications like those. And for mobile as well, there's mobile frameworks, Apache, Cordova, PhoneGap, Ionic, that will let you to run the application inside a mobile device. And also regular web, plus offline, online, so many alternatives. So Angular 2 is a platform. It's not a library like jQuery or React. It's a platform. You get a lot of things out of the box. And most of them are optional, so you can just pick what features you like. And the performance is really good. I mean, I've been working with Angular 2 since January, since the alpha stage. So it's like 12 months right now. So I really faced the process, I mean, since the alpha stages, for alpha to beta and beta to release candidates, the performance really, really updated. If you check out the benchmark test, the rendering actually compared to Angular 1, the rendering and in the memory usage and everything is quite optimized. It's very optimized. Tooling. So there are a couple of tools. I use Atom, but I'm right now interested in Visual Studio Code because they have really nice TypeScript support and Angular 2 support. Also, WebStorm from IntelliJ is also really, really good. I'm just trying to find the best environment for Angular 2. Right now, it seems like the Visual Studio Code, which is free. And it has really nice code completion support for Angular 2 plus TypeScript, because TypeScript is from Microsoft, right? So adoption, well, so I guess no one uses in Turkey. In Angular 1, it's like crazy, right? Any Angular 1 users here, anyone experienced? Well, yeah, as you see, it's almost everyone has some played with it, used it, and the adoption is, I guess it's 1 million downloads per month, something crazy like that. And now it's going there. Right now, Angular 2 has been out for 1 month, but now it's, I guess, 500,000 per month. So it might, we're not sure if we'll reach the popularity of Angular 1, but it's almost really popular. For example, here's the graph. I get this from Igor Miner's tweet on Twitter. Is the one of the core members of the Angular team. So as you can see in October, the download numbers are really similar to the Angular 1. So it's around half, but I think in 2007 it will go beyond Angular 1. It's because people are also upgrading their apps from 1 to 2. A nice thing about Angular is that there's a really nice big community. So this slide is from DevOps, which was in November, I guess. Again, Igor is on stage. So there's a lot of educational websites like Manning, Egghead, also Udemy. There are a lot of courses. There are many component libraries like Prime Faces. Well, actually, they should have used PrimeNG. It's the wrong logo, but PrimeNG and the databases, other companies. So it's a big community, and one of the nice things about Angular 2 is that there are a lot of resources. If you like to get into the framework, there are many courses, many frameworks, many tutorials. So, and it is one of the nice things about the framework. So if you're interested, I will just briefly discuss the overview, just very simple. We'll just scratch the surface now, because things might get complex with Angular 2. So I just want to give you an overview about what the framework is about and cover some features. So, like many of other frameworks, there's a core in Angular 2 and also some optional features. For example, forms, validations, routing are optional features where the core has, the basic bindings, processing, change detection, and so on. I love TypeScript because as I have a Java backend and I don't really like writing plain old JavaScript. But when I see the TypeScript, it really looks like Java or C#. Anyone used TypeScript? Yes. So the nice thing about TypeScript is that it allows you, if you're a server-side developer or if you have any Java experience or something similar, it will make the transition to the front end easily, because many developers don't like writing JavaScript, but with TypeScript, it's a whole new world. So, but you can also write Angular 2 with JavaScript and Dart, but most of the tutorials will be about TypeScript. So, the architecture consists of components, mostly, and modules. So the component is a reusable UI section that you can place on your code, and each component has a template and what I call a model, because I have a JSF background. In JSF we have the model view, and you also have directives just like in Angular 1, but directives are not really used a lot as they were in Angular 1. Components and its templates connects using bindings. You can have property bindings and event bindings. Simple. Another nice thing about this architecture is that dependency injection, which is something we find in server-side frameworks, right? So you can write a service and have it injected to your components, like a service to authenticate the user, a service to load the data. And everything, these components, I mean, in an application you will have many components, right? If the application gets bigger. So in Angular 2, these components are organized in modules. So modules, I will discuss them as well. The modules are, again, reusable, encapsulated sections. They can have components, they can expose components, or they may not. So you create modules, and each modules have templates and components. So pretty simple. This is an Angular 2 application. So you need a tag name, and the Angular 2 will interpret that tag and create your application. And of course, there are nested components inside. So my app will contain some menus, the content section, footers, and so on. But this is just a simple Angular application, Angular 2 application. And of course, this is for SPA, single page application, right? So in your index.html, you need to add your my app tag. And of course, in the script section, you need to do some things to bootstrap the application. Angular 2 will find that my app tag and bootstrap the application. Bootstrap meaning in Angular 2 terms, executing the application. We'll load it. And that loading text, until the Angular 2 populates the content, you can have display some tricks like loading text. And this is using like a custom elements, as mentioned in the session before me, custom elements, which is a standard feature in, I guess it's supported in all browsers right now. Also, Angular 2 can use Shadow DOM and things like that. So everything is a component in Angular 2. This is what I call an annotation because I have a Java background, but they are in Angular 2, or they are called decorators, right? Add components. So this code is written in TypeScript. For example, this says I have this Hello World component, and Hello World component has one property that you can expose, which is text. And again, another property is there called input. It means this component can input, can get a text property, and you can do binding. So you can give properties to this component, and the component will just need to do something with it. In this case, just printing the result. And that curly braces, they are called. They are just there to output the property name. So Angular 2 syntax, and if you are familiar with Angular 1, I mean, this syntax is not really similar. This is something you need to get used to. But it took me like 1 week to get used to it, without going back to the cheat sheet and taking a look at what's going on. The Angular 2 application consists of a tree of components. So you have your main component, which we call app. App provides that main tag, my app or blah blah app. And for example, here, another component is, the main component is importing the Hello World component using the import statement. And then we can just use Hello World component inside our main component. Of course, another component can use our app component, so it will be a component tree. So, to interact with components, you need to do binding. So, many frameworks, many client-side frameworks, many server-side frameworks provide bindings so that you can interact with it. So, the component and the template, which template will create the DOM. So, from the component to the DOM, you can just, to output the property in read-only mode, we can just use the curly brace syntax. If you need to do binding, for example, this means, for example, the component has some sort of property like text. So if you want to give some value to that property, you can just use the brackets syntax. For events like click, mouse over, mouse enter, anything, or your custom events, which is quite cool in Angular 2, you can just use the event syntax as well. And finally, the Angular 1 users will remember this. ng model is also here. ng model has a similar syntax. Unlike in Angular 1, the syntax is a bit different, and this syntax means there's a two-way binding. So the second one, property is value, is just unidirectional, just one way. So when the value changes, the property will be updated. In this case, with the ng model case, whenever it's mostly for forms, so when you type something on an input field, the property will be updated. But if you update the property yourself, the model will be updated as well. So one important thing, the two-way binding is optional, so it's up to you if you need to do, because you know two-way binding is more expensive than one-way binding. So a bit more about template syntax. So for example, to just, also there's a nice Angular 2 cheat sheet on Angular 2 website. You can just check it out. The property name is the, the read-only mode. The value property or value is 10 and value is string 10. So there are a couple of differences which I see in our forums that users making. For example, if you need to pass the value 10 as a number, you need to use the brackets. Otherwise, it will be string 10. Another one is that, as I mentioned, for two-way binding, you need to use the braces. And for events, you can also get the event using the $event, which Angular will give you. Also, ng class, which is also similar in Angular 1, is here, which is one of my favorite features. Based on conditional, you can add remove style classes. Another one, structural directives, which is probably you will use it a lot in an Angular 2 application. ngIf to do some, if you need to conditional display a certain section, you need to use ngIf. The syntax is a bit different. You need to use the asterisk star symbol and add ngIf, and the expression needs to be a Boolean. So if the Boolean value active is really true, then that content will be displayed. So it's not like hiding it with CSS. It won't exist in the DOM. And to repeat a collection, we have ng4. Syntax is similar, but let is like from TypeScript. So if you have an array with 5 elements, if you need to do some unordered list, then the item you need to repeat is the list li element, right? So in that case, you can just apply that to the li element. Behind the scenes, they call the template syntax, but they also call it the desugar syntax. In the backend, they will just create a template element, like in web components. The template element is also supported in all browsers, as I know, and they will just use the HTML template standard element to create these UIs. Just like in Angular 1, we have the directives. So the directives, they don't have a separate tag like my app, but they can add behavior or change some of the small parts of the element they have been applied on, which we call the host. So, for example, we have this tooltip directive in PrimeNG, where you can apply it on any element, and on mouse over and mouse out, you will get a nice tooltip. So to do that, we have created a tooltip directive. So here you can see that at the bottom end, there's an input element, and it gets the tooltip attribute. So directives are applied as attributes. The text property will be just written to the text of the tooltip. So when you mouse over, there's also this host listener, which is also a decorator. So you can listen the mouse enter of the host, of your host. So you can add behaviors, so which is a really nice feature. But in general, you will be writing a lot of components and sometimes directives. So unlike in Angular 1, the components is the core, unlike the directives. So those are the basics. Any questions about the basics? Okay. Now, I mean, I've never seen an application without forms. So what Angular 2 provides us for form processing? Two things. There are two different models for form processing, which is template-driven, which we call using ng model, and the other one is the reactive, which is the cooler way of doing forms. So I will just first cover the ng model. So Angular 1, it's quite similar, ng model. So whenever you type something on this input field, the user property in your component will be updated. But if the user changes, again, because since there's a two-way binding there, it will also reflect the changes. So if I just omit the inside the braces, it will be a one-way binding, right? So when you type something, it will not update your component. Again, this is the whole story. We have the component called my component, or let's say address component, where you need to get some address, street, city, country, blah, blah. So in that case, we have the my component, which is the tag name, and it has a template. Each component has a template, which you can just write inline or use a template URL to get it from an external HTML. And Angular 2 will load it. So here we are binding the ng model to the user property. So whenever you type something, it will update it. If the user changes, the property will be updated as well, because it's two-way. Simple, right? The new way of, frankly, I'm not sure which one is suggested, so it depends on your decision. There's also the model-driven, but in our forums, in the community, I see that the reactive forms, which is official name is model-driven forms, are most commonly used than the old way of the classic forms. So in that case, we are not really binding a property. You don't need to create properties for each field. You create a form, which will have its own API using Form Builder. So we are binding this input field to something called user and using the form control name, which is a bit long, but it does the job. So this is the backend. So here, as you can see, we have two new APIs in Angular 2, Form Group and Form Builder. Form Group represents your form, which is an API, and the Form Builder helps you to build that form. I will cover dependency injection, but the way to get an instance of the Form Builder is using the constructor. So this is a constructor injection. And at the ng on init, which is a callback for Angular 2, so that you can init stuff, initialize stuff, we are creating a new user form and grouping a couple of fields. For example, the user is a new form control. The empty field is the default value. So if you're initializing the page, you can get it from database, for example, for an update screen. And if you have any validators, like required length and things like that, you can apply the validators or your custom validators in case you need here. And the form tag has to get the form group binding, which will be your form. Here, my form representation is user form, so I'm binding that to my form. And ng submit, I haven't added it to the component, but ng submit means whenever this form is posted, you can get it from the user's form value, which will give you a JSON, which is cool. So you can just send it directly to the server. Another thing is that to bind that user form control to the input field, to the actual DOM element, you need to use the form control name. So this is the reactive version. And the nice thing about the main thing about the reactives over the, let's say, non-reactives is that you can write change detector. So whenever something on the form changes, you can just receive a callback. So dependency injection. Anyone knows which city is this? It's I guess Malaga, or it can be Antalya. It's Antalya. So injectables. Again, if you are work with Java or something similar, I guess this stuff seems very similar, I guess, right? Injectable. In Java, in CDI, we have @inject, right, to inject stuff. But in Angular 2, it will just do it by type. So you don't need to do @inject. But to create something that can be injectable, well, the notation or the decorator name is injectable. So here I have a service, car service, that I want to load some data from the server, right? Make a REST call. To do that, I need to do some HTTP client. So Angular 2 has a built-in one, thankfully. Again, Angular 2 is a platform. It gives you all kinds of APIs to do your application. So I get the HTTP, just one line, and I can just call, get the car list and get a promise. And also you can use observables here. It depends on what you like. Then I can just get the list of cars and send it to whoever calls me. So this is a service. How to inject the service to your component? Using constructor. As far as I know, there's no setter injection or property injection, just like in other frameworks, but the constructor injection will be fine. The one thing is that if you have many services, then you will have a lot of arguments. So facade will just do the job in that case. So you can create a facade service and then get the other services from that. So it will be a gateway. So we need to import it from its file, and then use constructor to get a hook, and at ng on init, it will be available, so that you can initialize the page like that. Okay, a bit more complex topic is Angular 2 is modular. This is very interesting because we were working with Angular 2 in I guess it's September. We were very happy that the release candidate was out. So it was RC1. So after RC1, we get RC2. So a couple of things changed, broken. But I guess it's RC3, then the whole architecture changed in the release candidate. And they've introduced modules. So we have to rewrite all the applications, which is cool. And they have written the router 3 times. So they have the more deprecated one, and the current one. RC means router crisis, not the release candidate. So, but anyway, it's fine right now. And the modules are really, really nice feature. So you have components, right? So you can just encapsulate certain components in modules. So modules, I guess if you're doing front end, you will be familiar with JavaScript modules, right? And to create a module, there's a nice decorator called ng module. And a module can have imports, exports, and declarations, 3 properties. So this is a module. A module can include components like my component, your component, address component, user component, search component, a data component, and directives like the tooltip and things like that. Services as well. So it will be an encapsulated module with components, directives, services, even values and functions. And how modules interact with each other. So so you have a module A, which has 2 components, and you have module B, which have 2 components, and module C with 2 components as well, and also a directive. So module B depends on module A. So it needs the components in directives, whatever services in module A. So it needs to import it. The nice thing is that another module can import the module A as well. So if you create a reusable module, you can just have it imported to your other modules. Module, you can think of like, for example, in our application, it's a, for example, admin module, user module, right? So certain parts of your application, like moderator module and things like that. So you can just logically organize your application in modules, which will be a really nice way of architecture. So B imports C as well. So module B really needs these two modules. So this is more like a high-level thing, right? So in Angular 2, we have ng module. An application itself is a module. It imports other modules and declares components. So here, the common module has the core parts in Angular 2. So we are importing that in our import section, as you can see, common module. And my module has 2 components, components 1, component A1, and component A2. I am also, let's say, using component A2 like internal, but I need some other clients of my module to have component A1. So I'm exporting that, which is you're exposing component A1, but not component A2. Here, there's a module. So this is my module A, right? In ng module, this is module B. In B, I'm importing module A using the import section. So I'm also getting the common module and module A as well. I also declare here in module B 2 components. So this means component B1 and B2 can access component A1, right? Whatever exported, which is component A1. So this is the ng module. So how do we use it in Angular 2? So as I mentioned, the application itself is a module. So you have, for example, if you need to use forms, reactive forms also has a module called reactive modules. So Angular 2 is based on a modular architecture, right? So as I mentioned, you can just choose which ones you like. So if you need forms or reactive forms, you can just import it. Browser module and HTTP module. So if you need to do some AJAX call, you need to import HTTP module. So here in the main section, we are importing in the application, telling Angular that we need the forms and HTTP in browser. The declarations are your pages actually mostly. The app components, let's say admin page, user list page. So the page and component in this case in the main module are mostly they refer to the pages. And the bootstrap means so whenever the Angular 2 creates your application, it should initialize the app component to start with so that your my app will be triggered. Finally, I will discuss the router. So router is, again, we had 3 of them in Angular until the 2.0 release. So you have a couple of pages, right? I mean, this is an SPA, so you need a router, and Angular 2 creates one for you. So you have the main page, create page, confirmation, detail, and user can just navigate between these pages. So you need the router module here as well. If you check out the routes, you can just say, okay, whenever the user accesses the create using the URL, initialize create view component. And whenever the user accesses detail, initialize the detail view component. And in the modules, you need to, in your main application, you need to import your modules, your route definitions to your application. And to navigate between these pages, you can just use router link. And there's also the router outlet. So if you have a template, like in the middle, you need the content to change, right? So the create view component will sit in the center of your main page. As far as I know, there are 2 ways to do URLs. If you can just have a regular REST-based URLs or also hash-based URLs. So it depends on which one you prefer. I think the default one is regular one, but if you're using a server like Apache, you need to do some configurations so that whatever URL after your app has to go to the index.html, so that otherwise you will get a page not found exception. So a couple of demos. Anyone used Angular CLI in 1, 2? Yeah, I will just use CLI here. My advice will be just starting with CLI because the quick start example is not really easy to get started with. CLI is a command line tool for Angular 2. You can just, in a couple of lines, you can create your application. It will have tests. It will just have a local server and so on. So, of course, I have done these steps. So the idea is that you get it from npm. And ng-new means that it will create a new application. And then you can just seed it into it and call ng-serve. If you go to localhost something, I think it's 4200, you can have your application there. Okay, so here I have this ng demo. This is, I haven't actually touched anything. I have just created it. Let's see what we have here. End-to-end tests, configurations. They have moved to Webpack from System.js. The quick start uses System.js, but the CLI is using Webpack. So here is the application under source folder. This is index.html here. I'll just make it a bit bigger. Here we have the ng demo application here as well, and some script files like polyfills for the browsers that do not support the new stuff. Okay, here is the main.ts. So main.ts means it will just load our ng demo app and bootstrap it. Bootstrap means, create it. So here's the app component, ng demo app. So here we have the app. The app has ng demo component HTML here, and there's a title property, and here you have the title. So it's a simple binding. So let's see. ng serve, right? Serving on 42. Okay, so this is the application you will get when you run CLI. So here you can do simple checks as well. For example, the nice thing about is that it will instantly refresh your browser. For example, here, works, man. And it will just load it, right? So, for example, let's do a simple binding. Right. When I type it, it doesn't update the title, right? Because this is one way, just brackets. So if you do add, if you need two-way, which seemed a bit weird to all Angular 1 users, but I'm pretty sure you can get used to it. And now, so for example, for the buttons and things like that, the syntax will be click, right? Show. Or let's say toggle. And here we have, I can just add it to using ngIf, something active. And I can just go here, active Boolean, and toggle will just do. Okay. So whenever I click the button, it will just toggle the visibility of that. That's not correct. So super awesome Angular 2 application. But it will cover the basics. So, so after the basics, you can move on to more advanced stuff. Like we had, I have created a simple demo as well, which is prime ng quick start CLI. So it will just use the data table, and there will be a dialog, and you can create a simple CRUD application. Okay. I think it's in production mode, so it took some time to create the bundles. Okay, so here's the application. I have a list of cars. I can sort them and select them, update them, and create new records as well, and have pagination. So let's check out the code. Again, this is on the same structure, quick start CLI. App components here, and HTML. So I'm using the prime ng data table and a dialog. Here, I'm binding that to the value of the data table. So the data table requires an array of cars, which is cars, right? So here, I need to load it. I have a car service, which is injectable, just like I mentioned. It just gets the HTTP, loads them from somewhere. And now I have it injected here with the car server. And then on ng init, I can just get the cars and assign it to my car. So this will trigger the change detection, right? So here, this is bound to cars. So the component will just give that new cars to the component, which is p data table, and it will just update itself. Also, we have, for example, the selected car instance, which we will just use, for example, when we click on it, let's say on row select, we are calling on row select. Let's check that one out. We are cloning the car for editing and displaying the dialog. So display dialog is a property bound to the visible property of here. So again, when I change it, the Angular 2 will trigger change detection, and it will just show the dialog. Speaking of PrimeNG, so it's a UI library for Angular 2. We are developing it since January 2016. It currently has 70 plus components. It's open source, as we always do. It's free. It's under MIT license. There are themes and templates if you need some better UIs, and there's support as well. So these are one of the couple of templates. So for example, so I'm just increasing the complexity of the applications. Now you get the hello world, you get the simple data table, now you'll get the full application. So I will just use the Ultima demo here. Okay, so this is the application. Here you can have this theme is based on material design that we have created. It's called Ultima. It took 1 month to create all the CSS and things. So these are input fields and buttons and checkboxes and so on. Data table here, charts, and other things. So you can have a menu as well. You can change the UI. For example, the data demo here is here as well. For example, the sorted. And you can just change the theme to something different. And the UI is customizable. Of course, you can get a horizontal menu and things like that, but the screen is too small. So if you prefer something material, you can either get this, or Google also is working on Angular UI. There's also a couple of other libraries as well. And speaking of PrimeNG, let's wrap it up. So this is open source, completely free. For example, you have data components, pick lists, whatever you can find in Prime Faces, most of them, they're also available here. Charts, panels, accordions, tab views. So you can just check out PrimeNG. Currently, it is the most complete one, and we will keep improving it in upcoming releases. So let's wrap it up. Can you guess which city is this? Antalya, yes. I'm from Antalya, so my presentations will include Antalya every time. So, couple of things before we finish. So one thing that might cause a problem is the routes. Routes are loaded eagerly, so when you run the application, if you have 100 components, 100 pages, they will load them. It will take probably 10 seconds or something. So we had this problem. When we created PrimeNG, we only have a couple of demos, but now we have 100 pages. It started to take 10 seconds to load the application. Then we configured lazy loading so that the component will not be loaded unless you access it. So it will just now takes less than 1 second. So it is also the bundle sizes, we have minimized them. So the Angular 2 can bite you. You need to make sure that it's properly configured for production before you launch it. Also, you might get confused because there's a system.js in Angular 2 Quick Start, but everyone suggests Webpack. So you need to use Webpack, otherwise we had 800 requests when we had system.js. It wasn't really optimized, but no one really, I don't think anyone uses Angular 2 with system.js, although Quick Start uses it. You need to make sure you have Webpack set up for Angular 2. Another important thing, which is an advanced topic, the compiler. So those components, services, directives has to be compiled. So some JavaScript has to be created. You can do it at the browser using GIT, just in time. So when you run the application, it will compile it and it will run it. Of course, it will take time, And you need to include the compiler in the browser. So you lose bandwidth, you force your users to download the compiler, which is unnecessary, and also it will take time to initialize the page. It is mostly for development environment. It's slower and needs a bigger bundle, so it's not the ideal one. The AOT is ahead of time, which has a cool name, but it means pre-compiled. So you just compile it before you load it. But ahead of time is a really interesting name. So it's for production. So you just create those files in your build time and just bundle them and put them to the browser. So a couple of things. As I mentioned, it's a platform. I cannot discuss, because everything I've discussed, like modules, components, they need their own 45-minute presentation. So I'm just trying to give you an overview. But things to follow up, what Angular 2 provides. Animation API, which is kind of new. We also use it in dialogues to up fadings, slidings, and things like that, which is really nice. Animation API is there. Observables, we have used them in our one of our demos. So you can subscribe to a service, observable, and whenever something is published, you can get notifications. So this is a nice way when you need to communicate between components or pages. So whenever something happens in some page, you can get notified. So observables using RxJS is there. Styling, there are a couple of styling techniques. You can just embed them inside your templates or load them from a URL, but you need to make sure that sometimes this is a common problem. People write some styles, but they're not applied because Angular applies scoping. There are a couple of free modes, which is you can just say don't apply in scoping, just fake the scoping or use shadow DOM. So testing is quite important, and Angular 2 is very highly testable using Jasmine, Karma, and Protector. The NG Angular 2 CLI brings these for you. Security is there, using a couple of decorators. So you can protect your routes, pages, and your UI as well, using can activate, can deactivate. Server rendering, I haven't really played with it, but I think it's becoming stable using Angular Universal. So since this is an SPA, it might have problems with the search engine optimization. So, and to speed it up, you can just render the initial content from server, from Node. And server rendering is there, but really I haven't played with it. Change detection, it also has a couple of modes, like push versus regular. I really highly suggest checking out the change detection approaches in Angular 2. Couple of tips. You should use Webpack instead of System.js in your applications. Just don't bother with System.js. I'm pretty sure after this presentation, when you get back home, you will just play with Angular 2 a bit. There are also plunkers, so you just don't need to install anything. But my tip would be use Webpack. Use CLI to get started and to create your applications, because all these tests, end-to-end tests, configurations, it will take time, and you can just say, okay, I won't do it. This is so complex, because the configuration will be a bit irritating, but CLI just makes it everything ready. So AOT and lazy for production is a must, and you need to use probably, you need the library. In that case, you can use PrimeNG. Okay, a couple of questions. I created a couple of questions for you in case you can just choose them. Do you need to upgrade from 1 to 2? Is it stable? Should I use it? Should I use React? Which UI library to choose? Should I do backend? I don't like frontend. And the future of dollar in Turkey. Okay, any questions from these or any other ones? Yeah. Well, yeah, that's the System.js. Just frankly, for myself, I couldn't figure out how to bundle them. It just loads every file instantly. Webpack, it's like a Swiss knife. So you can get Webpack is a module bundler. System is a System.js module loader. So you need to have bundles. So Webpack does everything for you. It bundles your modules, loads your CSS, compiles your TypeScript. Webpack is not just a simple tool. It will just it sits in the core of your application. it will just do anything. So compile TypeScript, compile SAS from to CSS. There are a couple of loaders, but System.js is just a module loader, and it doesn't really do much, and just for, and it causes problems for us. So again, as I mentioned, Webpack is a better choice. Any other questions? I'm sometimes considering that, going back to backend. Yeah. But it's also complex these days with all the microservices and things. Yeah. No, it was, but we had to rewrite everything because it sometimes, not sometimes, all the times almost doesn't play nice with Angular 2. Because jQuery tries to manipulate DOM, but it's up to Angular 2, right? So they just collide. Yeah.
When it uses virtual DOM for running for performance issues, does anything Angular 2?
There's no virtual DOM, as I'm afraid, as far as I know, in Angular 2. It just creates the DOM. Change detection is a bit different, yeah. Their architecture is different.
The architecture maybe uses...
in Angular 2?
In Angular 2, web workers or anything like that?
I think WebWork, I'm not really sure. I haven't digged the change detection that much yet. Any other questions? Yeah.
Has Angular 2 any difference from Angular 1 with dirty digest cycle?
Yeah, it's a new framework. I don't think any digest in Angular 2. There's
No
compile, but
digest.
there's no digest.
Yep.
It's a whole new framework. There are not many different similarities, except just the names. It's a new framework. Also, Angular 3 is coming out in March. Yeah, and 4 in 6 months. Yeah, every 6 months they will release a new major version, but they promise that it won't be rewritten from scratch. But it might have breaking changes. Hopefully not that big. Thank you. Angular 2.3 is out just yesterday, I guess, or the day before. So it's like, the browsers. They are using semantic versioning. They are updating it constantly to the major. So I don't want to scare you, but yeah, the versions are not updated with bigger numbers. Okay, thank you very much. So anyone interested in Angular 2 after that, will you just go and play with it in the evening? Yeah, okay, thank you.